all the many different streams of protests need to be joined together and rapidly draw in many, many more to become a massive wave of millions and millions demanding, insisting, determined to make this demand a reality. The Trump fascist regime must go.
Welcome to the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is Friday, April 11th, 2025. This is our 243rd episode. My name is Sansara Taylor, and I'm very happy to be joined today by Annie Day. Welcome.
Very glad to be here. At the top of today's show, you heard the voice of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, who's brought forward a new communism and a strategy for an actual revolution in this country. That is what we base ourselves on for revolution, nothing less. And you'll be hearing more from Bob Avakian later in today's episode.
That's right. We will today be talking about some of the recent developments in the last week, many of them very negative. Some of them quite positive and important to build on. And then, as Annie said later in the show, we'll share some things about the future that is possible, the revolutionary, emancipating future that Bob Avakian has re-envisioned. We'll hear from Bob Avakian on that and a few other things later. So to start us off, this week, as will be the case unless and until the demand that the Trump fascist regime must go is won, this week has been a continuation of acceleration towards fascist consolidation. The Supreme Court weighed in this week and ruled that Donald Trump can continue to use the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to deport immigrants from Venezuela to El Salvador to disappear into a black hole prison that nobody's ever gotten out of in the middle of a jungle down there to accelerate deportations. It is now over 600 students across this country who have had their visas revoked or their immigration status changed by this regime, largely owing to their participation in protests, which should be protected by the First Amendment, protests against the genocide in Gaza and other things. Trump's press secretary came out and affirmed that Donald Trump is now moving to figure out how to deport U.S. citizens.
Over the weekend, President Trump said that he would be willing to have U.S. citizens deported to El Salvador with the cooperation of President Bukele. How would that work legally, and how many people would potentially be available for that operation?
So the president has discussed this idea quite a few times publicly. He's also discussed it privately. You're referring to the president's idea for American citizens to potentially be deported.
These crimes of this regime are mounting by the day.
Fascism. This is a word you're going to hear a lot today. Let's hear from Bob Avakian on what fascism is.
Fascism is a qualitatively different way that this system enforces its rule over people. Trump fascism is a regime that openly and aggressively strips away basic rights and blatantly declares that there is no rule of law and due process of law other than what it dictates, and that raw destructive power is what must rule in the international arena, without even the pretense of adherence to international law or concern about the sovereignty or even the right to exist of less powerful peoples and countries. It is a regime that is bent on unleashing unregulated and unfettered capitalist plunder, and in the pursuit of that takes a sledgehammer or chainsaw to crucial programs and services that people depend on, ruining livelihoods, wrecking science and healthcare, undermining and perverting education, and creating chaos that will cause huge numbers of people to suffer, here and all over the world.
So that is what we're facing. And with fascism, it can become too late, which is why it was so important. And now we want to talk about the positive. It was so important that last Saturday, there were mass protests all across the country. Over 1 million, maybe several million people filled the streets from big cities to small towns in red states, in purple states, like all across the country. Over 1,300 cities had protests. And for the first time in the most significant and largest protest since the Trump regime came to power, people stood up, and it was, the decent country beginning to see each other.
Yeah, I like in Ketchum, Idaho, just to give one example, a town of 3,555 people, that's their population. They had a protest of over 500 people. And you saw this outpouring. As Bob Avakian has made this point, that this country really is split down the middle. There are two countries within this country. There's a fascist country, those who are thrilling at all the hatred, all the bigotry, all the white supremacy, all the terror being unleashed by Donald Trump and his regime. And there's a decent country that up till now has been pretty passive, pretty demoralized, very, kind of silent, way too silent, not entirely, but way too silent. But this decent country has been there. The people who are outraged, who are terrified about what Trump is doing, who don't want to see it. And like you said, they began to stand up and come out and see themselves, see each other, and assert themselves. And there was, these protests were called under the thematic of hands off. And so there was a lot of expressions of hands off Medicaid, hands off Social Security, hands off the national parks. There was a lot of that was really important. But there was also significant in these outpourings, a tremendous amount of recognition of the fascist danger. It was uneven. It was not everybody, but we want to highlight this because this is important. There were signs, very creative signs across the board. But some of the signs that highlighted the fascism, this one that calls Donald Trump and the rest, the Third Reich, obviously calling them shitheads, but also referencing the Third Reich of the Nazis in Germany. One of my favorites, mocking and flipping the way that Donald Trump really went after Haitian immigrants during the election campaign in a very ugly and racist way. These signs that say, they're eating all the checks, they're eating all the balances, talking about how the Trump MAGA regime is taking a sledgehammer to the separation of powers, basic checks and balances, which are supposed to be how this country is governed. More overt things like veterans against fascism, resist like it's Germany in 1938. That's during the rise of the Nazis before fascism had consolidated there. Penguins against fascism.
I like that. In LA, there were a bunch, and I saw pictures like this across the country. People in full penguin outfits saying, stand against fascism or leave us alone.
And, other things, very creative, artistic signs and other things. Trump is working out of the authoritarian playbook, wrecking the free press, wrecking knowledge, wrecking justice and laws. So you had, a significant recognition and some depth to this understanding among a number of people, which is, I think, one of the reasons why refusefascism.org, who organized contingents. We were out there, among them in D.C. in particular, Los Angeles and some other cities around the country, got a really, really deep and positive reception, bringing out its call to conscience, its call to act, and the demand that the Trump fascist regime must go in the name of humanity. We refuse to accept a fascist America.
The only way we are going to beat this is coming together, working together, and resisting together. Being out in the streets saying, hands off the people and their rights is the right place to be, the right thing to do. Make some noise. But I want to tell you something that you're probably not going to hear from other people today. That there is a movement, Refuse Fascism, that exists for one purpose, and that is to drive out this fascist regime. In the name of humanity. In the name of humanity. We refuse to accept. We refuse to accept. A fascist America. A fascist America. Trump must go. Trump must go.
This message from Refuse Fascism, it resonated. The call to conscience was taken up by thousands of people, grabbed copies of it, people who newly got involved in the organization and the movement. But this is also an understanding that has to be deepened among many, many people so that, Bob Avakian has made the point, if people don't understand what we're facing and that it is fascism, it is a qualitative change in the form of rule. They won't be mobilized in the necessary numbers and with the necessary determination to do what must be done, which is to fill the streets, not one time, but again and again, coming back with growing determination, building on what we saw, but on such a level and with such sustained momentum that we create the kind of profound political crisis where Donald Trump cannot govern this country, cannot go forward with imposing his fascist program, and cannot even hold on to the reins of power. This is what needs to become. And so this weekend was very significant towards that. And the message and the mission that Refuse Fascism brought in is so essential and needs to take root and spread.
I also think it's from the perspective of what's required. Another aspect of what was positive stands out. I mean, there was not the sentiment in this crowd that this was a one-off. People did feel like, okay, we have to be the block here. And I'll say one other sign that I was very moved by is in Miami, someone had a big sign in big letters that said, "We are not afraid." And then in small letters, "Maybe a little bit, but fuck it." And I think one of the, again, positive things coming off of this is there is more of a sense of momentum of, it's beginning. It's not yet what it needs to be, but there are now protests called on April 19th. There are the immigrants' rights movement calling for protests, a week of action, actually, from May 1st to May 5th, with mass protests and other forms of direct action. And this sense and this determination that we cannot stop. And then exactly to infuse that with the understanding that Refuse Fascism has about what's really needed of growing to millions.
This is the responsibility before us. And it is important as well that people understand that 2026 and the elections, because this was a message being put out. We're going to rally towards, grab them by the midterms. That was also out there. We're going to get him back in the elections. Waiting for 2026, waiting for 2028 is just a deathly strategy. First of all, this is just way, way too late. Trump is moving really fast. I mean, we're filming the show, watching the headlines, and there's more crimes coming to unearthed as we film every day. People who are paying attention are experiencing this. They're moving rapidly. We have to bring forward the outrage and the determination to demand that Trump and the whole fascist regime must go. This needs to happen sooner than 2026. And anybody who thinks that Trump is going to respect an election in 2026 or 2028 that he loses is smoking something. I mean, the guy already, he fomented a violent coup in 2020, almost stole the election then. He pardoned all the criminals who were part of that, convicted criminals, violent criminals who were part of that. People who tried to hang the vice president, okay? He told everybody, if you vote for me now in this last election, you'll never have to vote again. He said, I want to be a dictator. He's saying he wants a third term. Exactly. He's saying he's not kidding. And everything he's promised that people dismiss because it's too out there, he is following through on.
Yeah, no, exactly. The promising a third term is something that people do have to take this seriously. I think another aspect that needs to be strengthened and further transformed through this in these next days and weeks is, as important and as beautiful and as inspiring as these protests were, they are still too siloed and separated off from other forces and other movements. And it was predominantly white. It's very good to see that many white people in the streets. They have to be joined by others, by Black people, by Latino people. It was too separated off from the mass immigrants' rights movement. The students that had been walking out in LA just weeks ago. They were absent. That has to change. And
even in DC.
Yeah, exactly.
There were two major protests this day. I mean, the bigger one was this hands-off protest. It was very significant, very positive, but there was also an important protest against the genocide in Gaza happening in the same seat of power, just a little ways apart, and they weren't really
joined.
So these things need to, as Bob Avakian said, and we played at the opening of the show, all these different streams of struggle need to be coming together in one growing tide that's demanding that the Trump fascist regime must go. Because if we don't take the offense against the whole of it, each of these, fighting on different fronts will inevitably be end up on the defensive and overwhelmed by the momentum of this fascist juggernaut as a whole.
Yeah, another positive thing that that was present throughout this weekend was the Revcom Corps for the Emancipation of Humanity stepping out as a force and calling on uniting with the mass protests and calling on people to get organized for an actual revolution to put an end to the system that's given rise to this fascism and all these other atrocities. And they and also some of the other Revcoms were out there connecting people up with what's in this pamphlet, which is a series of social media messages from Bob Avakian, compiled by the Bob Avakian Institute, and it's called the Trump MAGA Fascism: What We're Really Facing, Why, and What Must Be Done to Defeat It Before It's Too Late. And, Bob Avakian has stood out for over 30 years in analyzing and sounding the alarm about the rise of fascism in this country. And there's a depth of understanding that goes into really recognizing the extreme danger of what we're facing, but also the course that's needed to defeat it. So we were connecting people up with Bob Avakian's leadership and the bigger questions that people are really agonized over about what kind of world do we live in where this is where we've come to and what kind of world really is possible.
Yeah, and we're going to play a little bit from Bob Avakian in just a minute, talking about the future and how the new society would be run. But before we go to that,
I forgot to ask you before we end. I want to ask you about what's next for Refuse Fascism. We talked about the momentum that's starting to happen in terms of these next days and weeks, but.
Well, refusefascism.org just put out guidance to all the organizers around the country and to everybody who wants to see this go forward and see this fascist regime defeated, that we have to seize this moment. And there's this powerful, I mentioned it before, the call to conscience, call to act, which Refuse Fascism has put out. It's on their website, refusefascism.org/act. There's a brochure, you can print it out and spread it and go out in public. In big ways, in bold and creative ways, and in more low-key ways, whatever works. Different people are going to do different kinds of things, but spread this pamphlet. Get people to read it and sign it. Refuse Fascism is fighting for tens of thousands of people to put their signatures on this and forge a critical mass of people with an understanding and a commitment to take this movement forward, and to go out and disturb the air and challenge the decent people to step in and be part of the protests that are being planned by the immigrant rights forces in May, to be part of protests happening along the way. But also on April 27th, it's a Sunday, April 27th, there are going to be regional mass organizing meetings, and people should travel to them. They're going to be in New York City, in Los Angeles, and maybe in some other places around the country. Travel to them, bring new organizers to them, young people who want to get involved, people who know it's going to take more than one day of protest, to seriously strategize with what is it going to take to create the kind of political crisis through mass nonviolent struggle. How does that get brought into being where the Trump regime cannot maintain its hold on power and impose its fascist program, and where people get unleashed to work on that in the near future? In real time, keeping pace with this fascist acceleration.
Yeah, and I think we want to just close this segment with a heads up. On Revcom.us this week, there's a very powerful article about the upsurge in South Korea over these last months, and people have to recognize the scale of what has to happen here, and don't say it's not possible. Watch this video about that upsurge in South Korea and think about what the lessons are that we have to learn from that.
당연한 일인데 어쨌든 너무너무 기쁩니다. 그동안 고생하셨던 많은 사람들, 국민이 승리한 것 같습니다.
아까는 정말 파면 속고 나왔을 때는 어지러울 정도로 너무 기뻤고요. 내가 움직이지 않으면 결국 바뀌지 않는 게 민주주의 사회로 시작해서 계속해서 나와서 목소리를 내게 되었습니다. 우리나라는 민주주의 국가고요. 민주공화정이고 왕조 국가가 아닙니다. 윤석열이라는 대통령 한 사람이 모든 것을 결정할 수 있는 나라가 아닙니다.
또 이렇게 오랫동안 국민들이 시위에 나오고 또 밤을 새면서까지 해낸 결과라서 이 순간이 중요하다고 생각합니다. 기분이 너무 째져요.
일단 성소수자로서 윤석열이 집권하고 저희가 가장 불안했던 거는 더 큰 차별을 불러올 것이고 그 차별이 성소수자 생명에 더 직결될 것이라고 생각했습니다. 그리고 우리는 이 광장에서 연대를 이루어서 우리가 성소수자도 시민에 포함되어 윤석열 파면을 이루었다는 것에 굉장히 감동적입니다.
더 우리의 민주주의나 많은 사람들이 더 잘 살 수 있는 세상으로, 차별이 없는 세상으로 나가는 것이 우리가 또 이제 가야 될 길인 것 같습니다.
So what kind of world really is possible? We want to play a clip from a recent series of interviews that Sansara did with Bob Avakian. You can watch them in full on this channel and on youtube.com/Bob Avakian Official. And here he digs into, he's coming off of a question talking about what is new in the new communism that he's developed. And then Sansara asks him a very specific, concrete question that provides a lot of vision. So let's watch.
Picking up on going to the brink of being drawn and quartered, we've been talking.
Oh, you had to go there, huh?
Well, you brought it up. You brought it up.
Yeah, no, we do have to go there. Okay.
Well, I wanted to talk about this society in a very concrete way. You've been emphasizing that today we live in a country that is split down the middle, two countries in one. You have half the country or half the voting country just voted for a outright fascist, white supremacist, woman hater. After the revolution, or through the course of making a revolution, yes, some people will change their thinking. They'll be challenged, they'll transform, but a lot of people are not going to be with this revolution. Some who are going to be hell-bent against it still, all those people are not going to change. There'll be other sections of people who have been on the front lines leading and fighting for this, who've really become communist emancipators of humanity. How are they going to relate in this new society? How are they all going to be contained?
Well, again, that's a big question, but the answer to that is the application of another one of the very important principles of the new communism, which is solid core, with a, very, tremendous amount of elasticity on the basis of that solid core. What does that mean? It means that you have a solid core of the new society that understands fully and deeply the need to advance beyond all these oppressive relations, and everything goes along with it, which I've already spoken to, and is determined to struggle to carry the society forward toward that goal. That gets translated in all the different spheres of society. The Constitution does set down what the character of the economy is going to be. It's not like, well, we can have capitalism for a while and then socialism. That doesn't work because, if you have capitalism, it reorganizes people's, relations and people's ways of thinking that is going to take you back to all the horrors that you made a revolution to get rid of in the first place. So the Constitution lays out, it has a solid core. There's going to be a socialist economy, which means it's going to be an economy moving to overcome exploitation. It's going to be the society is going to be moving to overcome these long-standing, profound relations of oppression, some of which I referred to. All the inequalities and the degradation of people. It's going to be moving. That's all written into the Constitution, that those are concrete goals and objectives. So that on the one hand, sets the terms. On the other hand, those who disagree with that are not going to be just summarily declared beyond the pale, to use that term, and therefore they're all going to be rounded up, put in jail or executed. That's not the way you're going to get to communism. So the provision is made, and as I've said, it isn't just they're allowed, provision is even made for them to express their dissent in various ways, artistically, politically, socially, and whatever. But, that's within a certain framework of you're going toward a certain goal. And it gets characterized in the way the, elections are held so that, people can take part in elections who oppose the direction of society, but there is a certain solid core within the electoral process that is an instrument for moving society forward on the road of overcoming all this exploitation and oppression. At the same time, if a great majority of the people through the electoral process declare they want to go back to capitalism, and you can't talk them out of it, you can't talk sense to them, well then, they could actually effect that, but it would have to be a great, great majority. So you got this running through society, you have this principle of solid core with a lot of elasticity, but based on this solid core. And that, that's something that has to be handled correctly. And the leadership and growing numbers of the mass of people have to be led to understand why it's so important to proceed in this way and how to actually implement that and apply it in a living way. And let me just say one other thing, this idea of dissent, supposedly, under this system with this constitution, the great American democracy, supposedly, dissent is allowed. But you look what's happening to the people who've, protested against the genocide being carried out by Israel in Gaza with the full backing of the U.S. government, arming it to the, massively and covering it for it diplomatically and politically. Look what's happened on the campuses. You mentioned I was part of the campus protests back in the 1960s. I was part of the original free speech movement at UC Berkeley in 1964. And we were up against a lot of repressive measures by the administration and the powers beyond the administration at that time. But what's going on now in the campuses is far beyond that in terms of how repressive it is. That shows you what the actual nature of this democracy is. It's actually a dictatorship of the capitalist class, and as soon as anything touching on their fundamental interests, which the role of Israel in the strategic region of the Middle East is, down comes a heavy hammer of repression. And people have to not accept that. They have to rise up against it in even more powerful waves of protest and upheaval to not accept that and to break through this repression. Or you can even look at it in the intellectual realm. I talked about how with the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America, there would be provision made for people, even in the government, institutions, media, and so on, to express views opposing what the government is doing, or even opposing the government and the system as a whole. Try to find that in the dominant institutions of this great American democracy, which is really a dictatorship of the capitalist imperialist class. Even in the realm of publication, a major public intellectual, internationally renowned and respected, like Noam Chomsky, for example, who's not a communist revolutionary and isn't calling, let's overthrow the whole system, but is making a lot of sharp criticisms of what this, government in this country and this system does. He can't even get published in some of the major publishing, houses. Won't publish him, even though he's a world-renowned intellectual and respected around the world. So, there's nothing like that under this system. And it's partly, out of recognition of, why, sort of in opposition to that, why it's so important to have intellectual and cultural ferment, that this is written into the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America.
So that was from part 2 of an interview with Bob Avakian that Sansara did recently. You can, like I said, watch it in full on this channel and on Bob Avakian's official platforms. And man, that is so refreshing to hear, to think about the lowered sights of today versus what Bob Avakian has actually envisioned of what's possible and what really is possible. And, I went to an event this week to hear the novelist Viet Thanh Nguyen. And someone asked him, he was talking about the need for the end of the American empire. And someone asked him, okay, well, you're talking about that, but then wouldn't it just be that the Chinese empire or the Russian empire takes over? And to his credit, he said, look, especially as novelists, I think we have a responsibility to have the capaciousness, the space and vision in our mind to imagine beyond empire. But then it was heavy because he also said, now I don't really know what that would be. And you just, again, think about the need for Bob Avakian's framework for what we heard to be reverberating, echoing, being debated all throughout society right now, and what that can change in terms of exactly at a time when the ground out from under people's feet is being torn up, that people actually can hear and understand that there really is a different way human society can be organized.
Yeah, and not only is what we just heard from Bob Avakian so radically different than this society, where people's rights are being just shattered by the minute, devoured by the minute, and it sits on a foundation, yes, of empire, of exploitation, all of this, but this is very different than even the best of revolution and communism as it was understood and as it was practiced before Bob Avakian forged this new communism. This is, I mean, the rule of law, the protection and provision for people to strike out in different directions, to dissent, to debate, to argue against the going to communism, argue against the socialist form of rule. These are things that are so radically different, and they're necessary. And they're necessary. And if you get into the rest of the interview, what is the big deal about this new communism just really stands out. And I want to underscore something else that you said, which is that this needs to get an audience right in this time. And a lot of people think, you look on the surface, we can't even get people to defeat fascism. Why should we be thinking about revolution? That's so far off. It is not. It is precisely when the norms of society break down, when the rulers cannot hold things together and rule in the ways that millions have been conditioned to accept, and the divisions are causing a crisis of legitimacy, which they're beginning to. That is actually when it is more ripe to bring about a different vision that can take hold among millions, to recruit thousands for revolution, but to actually win millions to a vision of a whole different way we could be living, a whole different way society could be organized. And nobody else on the planet has provided a vision that is so emancipating and so reality-based, including for how you would lead. I mean, I asked him, how would you lead not just a society in general, but this one with all these fascists and all these people who are coming from such different perspectives? How would you lead a society that would contain all of that and be just and have the room to breathe and also be on the road to complete emancipation? And this just stands out. Nobody else on the planet has done this work.
Yeah, and I would say don't take our word for it. Watch the interviews. Go on revcom.us. Read this Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America. I think especially now, pull people together. Watch these interviews with them. Watch a clip. Watch the whole part 1 or part 2. Talk with people seriously about what we're facing. Why? What kind of world should we be fighting for? Exactly the time, as we've been talking about, in a situation where people are in the streets together, standing shoulder to shoulder. There needs to be a lot of debate and discussion and grappling about the kind of world that is possible. And I think for the next 2 weeks, that's something that people should really focus on, is watching these interviews together with people and also distributing this pamphlet that we talked about earlier and raise funds for all of this, because the Bob Avakian's voice does not have the audience that it needs. And part of how we're going to change that is through funds, is through your contribution and your determination to spread it. So contribute and join the campaign to get this everywhere at Bob Avakian Official everywhere.org. And send us your comments and questions about what people are grappling with when you're out with them in the protests, spreading this pamphlet and spreading these materials.
Hi, I'm Lenny Wolff. And when I was growing up, I was raised Jewish, and the most meaningful holiday that we would celebrate would be Passover, which commemorates the Jewish emancipation from slavery 5 millennia ago in Egypt. And I hadn't thought much about it. And then Annie Day called me this morning. She said, "Hey, Lenny, let's do something about Passover on the show this week." And I said, "Well, what?"
So Passover was also one of my favorite holidays. And the part of the tradition is you're all reading from what's called the Haggadah, which is the book that guides you through the ritual and the memory and the story of Passover. And as part of the Haggadah, the youngest at the table reads the 4 questions. And the 4 questions are about why is this night different than any other nights? Why on this night do we eat the bitter herbs instead of the vegetables that we normally eat at dinner? And it walks through a number of questions like this.
Yeah, because it reminds us, and the kids were told, because it reminds us of the bitterness of our bondage in Egypt.
So it made me think about this year. Why is this night different than any other night? Why is this genocide that we're seeing ramping up in Gaza, that we've been watching for a year and a half, in any moral dimension? How is this genocide any different than the genocide and the oppression visited on the Jewish people?
And in regard to rhetoric, intent, and ideology, how is this fascist dictator any different than this fascist dictator?
One of the other questions that get asked is, why are we eating matzah, which is the unleavened bread, on this night and not normal bread the way we eat in meals throughout the rest of the year? And the unleavened bread is because the Jews, the story is, had to flee the desert and didn't have time to let the bread rise. And now we have to ask, why are we watching a situation in Gaza where every single bakery is shut down because of forced starvation?
You know, Annie, if you were to ask me what influence you're crying, because it's, you know, if you were to ask me what was the foremost influence of being raised Jewish, I would say that the lesson my parents tried to drill home is, when you smell the gas from the ovens, you do something about it.
And I grew up with a divide and a struggle in my family that some people said never again to Jewish people. And whatever we have to do to Arab people is justified because of the crimes that we suffered. But that is the wrong lesson from the Holocaust. That is the wrong lesson from the Passover story and from the millennia of oppression and the demonization against the Jewish people. The only right lesson is never again to anyone, is recognizing that oppression visited upon the Jewish people is no different than the oppression visited on the Palestinian people, and all the more that we have a responsibility to speak out against it when it is being done in our names.
I'll leave you with one more thought.
After the Holocaust, the worst thing that has happened to Jewish people is the state of Israel.
So we opened talking about the very positive aspects of these April 5th protests, but here we want to talk about something that's negative that's taking place, which is among some of the people who are out there protesting this fascism. There have been attacks on the Revcoms, the Revcom Corps for the Emancipation of Humanity, and the group Refuse Fascism, which unites people from very different perspectives, and then too many of the just divisiveness among the people standing up. So we need to talk here about the urgency of raising standards in the fight against this fascist regime.
Yeah, and overall raising standards and movements of opposition and the struggle for a different world. Look, here we have to stop and explain, what do we even mean by standards? Because honestly, especially among young people, who have come up in a culture of gossip and snark and canceling and tearing down, there's almost no understanding of either the need for open, substantive, deep, meaningful exchange and debate over the way forward, or the fact that we cannot tolerate, and it's very destructive, and really to the people in movements and to movements as a whole, to have the kind of tear down that passes way too much. Rumors, what am I talking about? I'm talking about people who foment divisions, spreading rumors, trying to get groups to be pit against each other, telling you don't listen to these people, don't listen to those people, and not backing it up with any argumentation of what the program is that people are putting forward, where it will lead, whether it will lead to something good or something harmful. Just saying, don't listen to them, they're no good. Maybe they're a cult, maybe they're too extreme, and spreading lies. And so we have to sort out. We need much, much more. And this is something Bob Avakian has been fighting for in his social media messages. We need much, much more substantive, open, honest, principled debate over what we're facing. It's a huge challenge to defeat fascism. People have to dig into this. What are we facing? What does it mean? What are the implications of it? And what's the strategy to go forward? These are life and death questions people have to thrash out together. And we can have differences as we stand together against this fascism. What there can be no toleration for, and what we need to raise our standards against, is the kind of divisions and rumor mongering and tear down that just divides movements. And we've seen people set up and killed in movements of opposition. There are lessons that were paid for in blood in the 1960s and in struggles all over the world, and they need to be learned and taken on board now if we're going to stand a chance to defeat this fascism and overcome what this regime would love to see. Divide and conquer, tear down. It does the work of the repressive state for them.
Yeah, you talked this weekend, Sansara, about how some of these attacks took shape in California. Let's watch.
I want you to know that yesterday something very negative happened. A small cabal of so-called leaders within 5051 here in California have captured the leadership of 5051 in this state, and they posted yesterday to stay away from this feeder rally and away from Refuse Fascism. And I'm going to tell you, we probably would have had a lot more people with us today if they hadn't done that. And it's important that everybody's coming out today, but as we've been talking about, we're bringing a unique message in. Now, what did they say when they posted this? They made the implication, they implied that Refuse Fascism promotes violence. This is not true, this is false, and I want to go on record and set the record straight. From our inception, over 8 years ago, Refuse Fascism has insisted on organizing non-violent mass protest and resistance. So there is not an ounce of truth in that claim. And Refuse Fascism is not putting people in danger. Well, what about the Revcoms, you might ask, the revolutionaries who are part of the Refuse Fascism coalition? I want to go on record here, too, by saying we Revcoms support the principles of nonviolence that Refuse Fascism has put forward for the movement against fascism. And in our own movement for revolution, we have insisted that because we are serious about an actual overthrow at this stage, and I'm quoting from our principles, we do not initiate violence. And we oppose all violence among the people and against the people. So this is completely false, this accusation. But really, this has nothing to do with why this group attacked Refuse Fascism. Why do I know this? Because I went on their Instagram post immediately to clarify and post our principles, as did others, but they deleted my comments and they blocked me. And they did the same to everybody else who tried to set the record straight. That's some shady shit. Okay, so that's obviously not their concern. But they went further than that. They literally told people, don't take any literature from the Revcoms. Don't read what they have to say. Report them if you see them at the protest. That's straight thought police territory, okay? Now that's right. Now back in the Middle Ages, during the Spanish Inquisition, the Catholic Church had this thing called anathema. And they would tell somebody, you're anathema. And then everybody else was not allowed to talk to that person, relate to that person, listen to what they had to say. And if you violated that, then you'd be anathema too. It was like blackmail. Shutting down thinking. Now, who wants a movement like that? Y'all want a movement like that?
No.
Hell no. If you have a difference with somebody else in the movement, put it forward openly and honestly. Debate it out. Let people learn from our differences as we stand shoulder and shoulder up against the real enemy.
That's
the
right.
fascism that threatens all of our futures.
All right.
This is what Refuse Fascism is fighting for. This is the message we're bringing in today. And this is why it's so important that you are here with refusefascism.org and why we have to spread this to the many tens of thousands who are out here in LA today and across the country. Because again, millions care deeply. But unless their caring is fused with a strategy that can defeat this fascism, unless we do what they just did in South Korea, unless we do what they've done in other countries driving out hated regimes, we will have to succumb to a fascist America. And that is not acceptable, sisters and brothers, beautiful people. So this is why we're here together. This is why we are handing out the call to conscience, call to action from Refuse Fascism. This is why we have to grow and recruit more people into this movement today and learn to stand together across our disagreements with principle and unity and love for humanity.
That's very important. And it's important to understand then, as part of building that broad unity, why the Revcoms in particular are attacked. The Revcoms are attacked because we're about real revolution. And because we're about real revolution, we follow the leadership of Bob Avakian. And Bob Avakian is loved and he's hated for the very same reason. Because he is about the actual overthrow of this system. Because he recognizes that humanity needs nothing less than total emancipation, and he has given his life and every fiber into his being to making that happen. And if you are somebody who's working within this system to build up a movement within this system that poses as radical, and that poses itself as the most radical. And here comes Bob Avakian talking about the actual most radical revolution there could be. Just to be honest, it exposes your ass. It exposes, if you're trying to get a piece of the system and here's somebody saying, nah, we got to get rid of this system, well, what's your capital? If you're, again, still trying to work within the terms of capitalism. So this is where a lot of these attacks come from. And then they make use of the soil of snark and cynicism that is way too common and passes. And this is what we have to challenge and get rid of. And whether or not you agree with what Bob Avakian is about, you have a responsibility to stand up and defend his leadership and defend the space that's urgently needed to debate the questions that he is putting himself to, which is how we're going to get free, how we're going to defeat this fascism, how we're going to bring a whole different world into being. And this means having his back. This means protecting and defending him and the Revcoms who follow him.
And Bob Avakian is also broken with a lot of the orthodoxies, even within the communist movement, which itself is controversial. That's what we showed before when he was talking about how the new society would be run in a whole different way than has ever been envisioned before. But it's also the case that if you even start to come into Refuse Fascism, which the Revcoms have played an important role in helping initiate and lead, but which also does unite people from very diverse perspectives and needs to include many, many more people, that there are forces, hardcore counter-revolutionary haters of Bob Avakian, haters of the Revcoms, and people who are threatened by the idea of the kind of massive fight and struggle, that nonviolent but massive self-sacrificing struggle that will be required to defeat Trump MAGA fascism, who have made it their business to come after and try to just wear down, overwhelm, blackmail, hate on, whisper in the ear of, and drive away from Refuse Fascism those who recognize and come forward into it and recognize that it actually has the mission that we need to take up if we're going to stop a fascist America. And this is unconscionable. And people need to not only have the moral fiber and integrity to stand up against it and not let it wear them down and be pulled away from this movement, but we also need to reject this and repudiate this and raise standards overall. If you come talking trash about Bob Avakian, about Refuse Fascism, about any other movement right now, you need to be told you got no place raising that crap in any movement of opposition. That's different than if you have a criticism. If you have a substantive argument, that should be welcomed, that should be aired out. But trash talking, rumoring, anathema-ing, blackmailing, that shit has to go.
Yeah, so as an illustration of the unity we do need, let's watch some of the voices from Refuse Fascism last weekend.
We are the people, we are the resistance, we are Refuse Fascism, and we will not back down!
Are you sick to your stomach after executive order? Executive order!
In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The Trump fascist regime must go.
Yeah.
We must all speak up and shut down these abductions. We must stand for our immigrant brothers and sisters. Khalil and Oster's abduction, arrest, and potential deportation are not about anti-Semitism. I know all about anti-Semitism. I experienced anti-Semitism right here in America. People threw rocks at my head for wearing this yarmulke. People put swastikas on my car. People shouted "Hail Hitler" to me with Nazi salutes, as was done by Europeans who murdered my ancestors. The same done in recent months by Elon Musk and Steve Bannon.
That's right.
The same done by Nazis marching in Ohio and Charlottesville.
right.
The same done by January 6ers with t-shirts that read 6 million is not enough. Supporting Palestinians is not anti-Semitism. Their existence is not offensive to me. Israel committing genocide and massacring them in my name is what is offensive. Free speech everywhere is being destroyed to cover for Israel's war crimes, their government overreach, and Musk and the president's fascism. It is the president and his cronies on their crusade against the Palestinian people that is fueling anti-Semitism.
Trump must go! Trump must go! Trump must go! Trump must go! In the name of humanity, Trump must go! Trump must go!
Now, I'm out here because I believe that if we would work together, there is nothing that we, the people, cannot accomplish working together. So let's work together.
Yes.
I am so proud to be marching with all of you in this crucial battle, an immediate goal that we need to go out and defeat this fascism and call on the millions of people not just to come out for one day, but come out every day to create a political crisis so deep and so disruptive, like in 2020, like South Korea, to bring this society to a halt, to demand that the Trump fascist regime must go.
This is for our future versus a fascist agenda that's already done real harm. Fascism is not just angry tweets or offensive words. Fascism is when a leader demonizes immigrants, targets entire communities, and uses state power to punish dissent. Fascism is when books are banned, teachers are silenced, truth is labeled as fake news. Fascism is when federal agencies are turned into weapons for political revenge. Fascism is when an unelected billionaire like Elon Musk is empowered to dismantle democracy under the name of efficiency. Fascism is when a president tells the military to shoot looters and calls violent white supremacists very fine people. Genocide has to end!
Move, Trump, get out the way! 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 Trump must go! Trump must go! Trump must go! Trump must go!
This is not a drill! This is not a drill! This is not just politics! This is fascism! We need a culture of resistance. We need performance art in the street. We need mass protests, civil disobedience, mutual aid. We need every DJ, poet, painter, pastor, organizer to use their gifts for liberation. Because the fascists have a platform, but we have the people.
And I want to say, look, if you haven't engaged already at Bob Avakian Official, I want you to take out your phones and follow that. Why? This is a person, a revolutionary leader, who's actually analyzed for decades the rise of the fascism in America. He has analyzed what is this system of capitalism, imperialism that this fascism comes out of. And he has brought forward a whole different way we could reorganize society, making an actual revolution to overthrow this system and putting in its place a fundamentally different system. Because we do not need to be living this way. We have to reorganize society in a different direction. And so I want everyone to get this in your hands. If you see this is called We Demand a Whole New Way to Live, a fundamentally different system.
And to close out our show today, we want to show you some footage of the Revcom Corps for the Emancipation of Humanity, representing out in the streets in the build-up to the April 5th protests and at the protests themselves.
I cannot say that I am not a woman, therefore a woman's right to abortion is not my concern. It is my concern, because her freedom is back for our freedom. I cannot say they are innocent, therefore it is not my problem. I cannot say if an LGBT person is being oppressed, it is not my problem. It is my problem. We cannot continue to walk by, keep our heads down, keep quiet, and hope that 4 years from now, things will get better. People! Things won't get better unless we make things better. Join us April 5th, Washington, D.C. for the mass demonstration. If somebody told you, and if you heard someplace that black people, you need to keep your ass at home because fascism does not affect you, they are lying to you. And you will end up in a place worse than where you are now. We can no longer be led by people who are not interested in the total emancipation of humanity. If you do not see yourself as part of humanity, there is something wrong with you. April 5th, we need you to join with us. Beyond April 5th. April 5th is important, but it is not a one-day event. This is an event until we create a political crisis so that this government can no longer govern. They can no longer continue with the devastation that they have. Threaten people with deportation for protesting the genocide of Palestinians. We cannot stay quiet. Black Americans, we understand what a genocide is. We have lived through our genocide. We continue to go through this slow genocide. So we must understand and identify and recognize the genocide of others. If you continue to stay silent in the face of the devastation that the Trump fascist administration is enacting on all of us, you are complicit. If you think that you are free of fascism, you are deluded. And you will find out very quickly that fascism is at your doorstep. So do not let somebody lie to you and say this is not your fight. Black people, this is your very fight. This has always been the fight against white supremacy. So do not be deceived. Do not be lied to. This is a fight of our life.
My name is Luna Hernandez. I'm with the Revcom Corps in Los Angeles. I'm a follower of the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian. And in this dispatch, he's saying that in order to defeat Trump MAGA fascism, we cannot be looking to some future elections. November 2026 is too late. We have to be working now to mobilize millions around this powerful unifying demand that the Trump fascist regime must go. That means all of us uniting all who can be united into the streets, not just one day, but day after day, like they're doing in South Korea. Because this is fascism. Fascism means a qualitatively different form of governing society, a capitalist imperialist dictatorship. So it's on all of us to actually get them out of power, and we're also coming from the understanding that the whole system is rotten and illegitimate, and we need and we demand a whole new way to live, a fundamentally different system. And to replace this system, people should go to revcom.us, find out, get into we demand a whole new way to live, a fundamentally different system. People should follow at Revcom Corps _LA, and people should follow at Bob Avakian Official. There's no one else on the planet right now that's actually arguing and saying what's true, that this is fascism and only the people can stop it. And he's the only one on this planet that's actually brought forward a strategy to make a revolution and a whole vision to reorganize society. That's a big deal. And if people were taking up his leadership way back when, instead of snarking at it, instead of sniping it, instead of bullshitting it, we'd be in a different place, you know? So people, this is a radical, revolutionary, communist leader like no other. And if you want to get free, if you want to emancipate humanity, Christianity, this is who you follow, this is who you get into. But whatever perspective you're coming from, whether you're a follower of BA, Bob Avakian or not, we actually have to, whether you're a Democrat, whoever you are, all the decent people need to come together to defeat Trump MAGA fascism in the streets.
So that brings us to the end of today's show. We want to thank the RNL, Revolution Nothing Less team, and support this show. Become a Patreon at patreon.com/the Revcoms. Put a comment in the comment section below and hit the notification bell. And between now and next week, talk with several people, as many as you can, about why they should tune in every week to the RNL show.
And remember to download and sign and spread refusefascism.org's call to conscience, call to action. Refuse Fascism is aiming to get tens of thousands of signatures in the near future to forge a critical mass to spread this movement and this mission, be out in the streets in bold ways and creative ways, spreading it and waking others up. And make plans now, April 27th, to be at and bring others to the regional Refuse Fascism mass organizing meetings to really strategize and get serious about how to bring forward the struggle to win the demand that the Trump fascist regime must go. So with that, we will see you back here next week.
See you next week.